Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed back into his dusty pickup truck. The Oklahoma sun was beating down mercilessly, and even at 7 in the morning, the heat was already making his shirt stick to his back. He had been checking fence lines since dawn, something he did every Tuesday without fail. At 52, Samuel could have easily paid his ranch hands to do this job, but old habits die hard. Besides, riding the boundaries of his vast property gave him time to think. 10,000 acres. That's what he owned now. 10,000 acres of some of the finest grazing land in the state. His grandfather would have been proud, Samuel thought, as he drove slowly along the dirt road that marked the eastern edge of his ranch. The old man had started with just 40 acres and a handful of cattle, back in 1952. Now the Morrison Ranch was one of the most successful operations in 3 counties. But success came with a price. Samuel's wife Margaret had understood this better than anyone. She used to joke that he loved his cattle more than he loved her, but she always said it with a smile that let him know she didn't really mean it. Margaret had been gone for 5 years now, taken by cancer at just 47. The doctors had given her 6 months, but she fought for 2 years. Samuel still missed her laugh, the way she hummed while making breakfast, and how she always waited up for him, no matter how late he came in from the fields. The truck hit a pothole, jerking Samuel back to the present. He was approaching the far northeastern corner of his property, a section he rarely visited. This area was mostly woodland, not suitable for grazing, and it bordered what used to be Cherokee land back in the day. His grandfather had bought this piece from the state in the 1960s, mainly to keep developers from building houses that would overlook the main ranch. Samuel slowed the truck as he noticed something unusual through the trees. There, barely visible among the cottonwoods and oaks, was a small wooden structure. It looked like a cabin, but that was impossible. He had owned this land for over 20 years, and he had never seen any building here before. Samuel parked the truck and grabbed his hat from the passenger seat, walking through the underbrush. Samuel could see that the cabin was old, but well maintained. It was small, maybe just 2 rooms, with a covered porch that wrapped around the front. Wildflowers grew in neat rows along the sides, and there was a small garden with tomatoes and herbs. Someone was definitely living here, but who, and more importantly, why hadn't he known about it? Samuel approached the cabin carefully. The front door was painted blue, and there were wind chimes hanging from the porch ceiling that made soft music in the morning breeze. He knocked gently on the doorframe. "Hello? Anyone home?" he called out. No answer. Samuel knocked again, louder. This time, still nothing. He tried the door handle and found it unlocked. In his experience, people who lived this far from town only left their doors unlocked if something was wrong. "Hello," Samuel called as he stepped inside. "I'm Samuel Morrison. I own this land. I'm not here to cause trouble." The inside of the cabin was clean and organized, but it was clear that whoever lived here didn't have much money. The furniture was old, but well cared for. Handmade quilts covered a small sofa, and the walls were decorated with beautiful drum catchers and what looked like traditional Native American artwork. The air smelled of herbs and something else Samuel couldn't identify. That's when he heard it, a soft coughing sound coming from the back room. Samuel moved slowly toward the sound, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. The bedroom was small and simple, with just a single bed, a dresser, and a chair. In the bed, covered with several layers of blankets despite the heat, was an elderly Native American woman. Her long gray hair was braided and spread across the pillow, and her face was flushed with fever. "Ma'am," Samuel said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman's eyes opened slowly. They were dark brown and surprisingly clear despite her obvious illness. She looked at Samuel for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was real or just a fever dream. "Water?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel looked around and saw a pitcher on the dresser, but when he picked it up, it was empty. "Hold on," he said. "I'll get you some water from my truck." He hurried outside to his pickup, where he always kept a cooler full of ice water. When he returned, the woman was trying to sit up but didn't have the strength. Samuel helped her lean against the headboard and held the cup to her lips while she drank small sips. "Thank you," she said when she had finished. Her voice was still weak, but Samuel could hear the dignity in it. "What's your name, ma'am?" Samuel asked gently. "Ayanna," she replied. "Ayanna Crowfeather." "Well, Mrs. Crowfeather, you're very sick. When's the last time you saw a doctor?" Ayanna closed her eyes and shook her head slightly. "No doctors. I use the old ways." Samuel could see that whatever old ways she had been using weren't working. The woman was burning up with fever, and she looked like she hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Mrs. Crowfeather, I don't mean any disrespect, but you need medical help. The nearest hospital is in Tulsa, about 40 miles from here. I can have an ambulance here in an hour." "No hospitals," Ayanna said firmly, though the effort of speaking seemed to exhaust her. "I die here, in my home, like my Thomas." Thomas must be her husband, Samuel thought. He looked around the small room and noticed a framed photograph on the dresser. It showed a young Native American couple standing in front of what looked like this same cabin. But many years ago, when the trees were smaller and the woman in the bed had long black hair instead of gray dot, Samuel faced a decision. He could call an ambulance against the woman's wishes, which seemed cruel. He could leave her here to die alone, which seemed even worse. Or he could do something that went against every practical instinct he had developed over 52 years of life. "Mrs. Crowfeather," Samuel said, making up his mind, "I'm going to take you to my house. I have a guest room there, and I can call my personal doctor to come see you. You don't have to go to a hospital, but you can't stay here alone in this condition." Ayanna looked at him with those clear brown eyes. "Why?" she asked simply. It was a good question, and Samuel wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. Maybe it was because he had spent too many nights alone in his big, empty house, thinking about Margaret and wondering what she would have wanted him to do. Maybe it was because he recognized something in this woman's face, a kind of quiet strength, that reminded him of his own grandmother. Or maybe it was just that leaving someone to die alone felt wrong in a way that went deeper than logic. "Because it's the right thing to do," Samuel said finally. Without waiting for her to argue, Samuel gently lifted Ayanna from the bed. She weighed almost nothing, and he was shocked at how frail she felt in his arms. He carried her out to his truck, settling her carefully in the passenger seat and wrapping her in one of the quilts from her cabin. As they drove away from the hidden cabin toward his ranch house, Samuel glanced over at his unexpected passenger. Ayanna had fallen asleep, her head resting against a window. Samuel had no idea that this moment, this simple decision to help a stranger, was about to change both of their lives in ways he never could have imagined. The Morrison Ranch house came into view as they crested the hill, its white walls and red roof looking solid and welcoming in the morning sun. Samuel had always been proud of his home, but now he found himself seeing it through different eyes. It was big enough for a family of 8, but for the past 5 years, it had housed only him and his housekeeper Rosa. Maybe, Samuel thought. As he pulled into the circular driveway, it was time for that to change. Dr. Martinez arrived at the Morrison Ranch within an hour of Samuel's phone call. The doctor had been treating the Morrison family for 15 years. And he knew Samuel well enough to understand that the rancher wouldn't call unless it was truly serious. What he didn't expect was to find his patient was a Cherokee woman who looked like she hadn't seen a doctor in decades. "Samuel, this woman is severely dehydrated and malnourished," Dr. Martinez said quietly as they stood outside the guest bedroom. "Her temperature is 103 degrees, and she has pneumonia in both lungs. At her age, This is very dangerous. Can you help her here? Samuel asked. She doesn't want to go to a hospital. Dr. Martinez rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's not ideal, but yes, I can treat her here if we're very careful. She'll need round-the-clock care for at least a week, maybe 2. I can prescribe antibiotics and set up an IV for fluids, but you'll need to hire a nurse. Done, Samuel said without hesitation. Samuel, do you understand what you're taking on? This woman could die, even with the best care, and if she recovers, she's going to need weeks of rehabilitation. This isn't like taking care of a sick calf. Samuel looked through the doorway at Ayanna, who was sleeping fitfully under the clean white sheets Rosa had put on the guest bed. I understand, Doc. Just do whatever needs to be done. Within 3 hours, Samuel's quiet guest wing had been transformed into a medical recovery room. Nurse Betty Coleman, a kind woman in her 50s, who usually worked at the county hospital, had agreed to stay at the ranch for as long as needed. 4 tubes snaked from Ayanna's thin arm to a bag of fluids hanging from a metal stand. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the room. Rosa, Samuel's housekeeper, moved through the house, like a woman on a mission. She had worked for the Morrison family for 12 years, and she had never seen Samuel make such an instant decision to help a stranger. But Rosa had grown up poor in Mexico, and she understood what it meant to be alone and sick with nowhere to turn. Mr. Samuel, Rosa said as she prepared a pot of chicken broth. This woman, she reminds me of my grandmother. Very proud, very strong, but gentle too. Samuel nodded. He had been thinking the same thing, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why Ayanna seemed so familiar to him. For the first 3 days, Ayanna drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she would wake up confused, speaking in what Samuel assumed was Cherokee. Other times she would look directly at him with those clear brown eyes and nod, as if she understood exactly where she was and why. Samuel found himself checking on her every few hours, even during the night. He told himself it was just concern for a sick person, but the truth was more complicated. There was something about Ayanna's quiet presence that filled a space in his house he hadn't even realized was empty. On the 4th day, Ayanna woke up, fully alert for the first time. Samuel was sitting in the chair beside her bed, reading a cattle breeding magazine, when he heard her voice. "You're the man who found me," she said simply. Samuel looked up, surprised to hear her speaking so clearly. "Yes, ma'am. How are you feeling?" "Better, weak, but better." Ayanna tried to sit up, but Samuel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "The nurse says you need to rest. Don't try to do too much too soon." Ayanna studied his face for a long moment. "Why did you bring me here? You don't know me." It was the same question she had asked in the cabin, and Samuel still wasn't sure he had a good answer. "My wife always said that sometimes we help people because we need to help them, not because they need our help." "Your wife sounds like a wise woman. Where is she?" "She died 5 years ago. Cancer." Ayanna nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. My Thomas died 3 years ago. Heart attack. One day he was working in our garden. The next day, he was gone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Samuel hadn't talked about Margaret with anyone in months. His children lived in Dallas and rarely called, and most of his friends thought 5 years was long enough to grieve. But something about Ayanna made it feel safe to mention his wife. "What will happen to me when I'm better?" Ayanna asked eventually. Samuel realized he hadn't thought that far ahead. "I guess you'll go back to your cabin, if that's what you want. That cabin sits on your land. I've been living there for 15 years, since Thomas and I lost our house in town. We thought nobody would notice if we fixed up the old hunting cabin and lived quietly. 15 years. Samuel was amazed. "I never knew anyone was there. We were careful to stay hidden. Thomas was afraid you would make us leave. After he died, I just stayed. I had nowhere else to go." Samuel felt a strange mix of emotions. He should probably be angry that someone had been living on his land without permission. but looking at this frail woman who had been surviving alone for 3 years, anger was the last thing he felt. As the days passed, Ayanna grew stronger. She started sitting up in bed, then moving to the chair by the window. Samuel brought her books about Oklahoma history, which she read eagerly. She told him stories about her life, about growing up on a reservation, about meeting Thomas when they were both 18, about their 45 years of marriage. Samuel found himself looking forward to their conversations more than anything else in his day. Ayanna had a way of listening that made him want to talk about things he had kept buried for years. He told her about building the ranch, about the early years when he and Margaret had struggled to make ends meet, about the loneliness that had settled over him like dust after Margaret's death. "You know," Ayanna said one evening as they watched the sunset from the guest room window, "Thomas used to say that the land doesn't really belong to us. We just take care of it for a while, and then we pass it on." Samuel had never thought about his ranch that way. To him, owning land meant security, success, something solid to pass on to his children. But Ayanna spoke about the earth like it was a living thing that deserved respect and care. "I've been thinking," Samuel said after a long pause, "when you're well enough, you don't have to go back to that cabin. I mean, you can if you want to, but this house is too big for just me and Rosa. The guest wing has its own entrance, its own kitchen. You could stay here, if you'd like." Ayanna turned to look at him, surprise evident in her eyes. "You would do that? Let a stranger live in your house?" "You're not a stranger anymore," Samuel said, and he realized it was true. In just 2 weeks, Ayanna had become more of a companion than anyone he had known since Margaret's death. "I don't have money to pay rent," Ayanna said quietly. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for company." That night, Samuel lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what he had just committed himself to. His practical side told him he was making a mistake, taking on responsibility for an elderly woman he barely knew. But for the first time in 5 years, his house felt alive again. There was laughter coming from the guest wing when Rosa brought Ayanna her meals. There were interesting conversations at dinner. There was someone to say good morning to and good night to. Maybe, Samuel thought as he finally drifted off to sleep. Margaret would approve of what he was doing. She had always been the one to take in stray cats and help neighbors in need. Perhaps taking care of Ayanna was just another way of taking care of the part of himself that Margaret had loved most. 3 weeks had passed since Ayanna moved into the guest wing, and Samuel's routine had changed completely. Instead of eating breakfast alone while reading cattle reports, he now found himself joining Ayanna on the covered porch each morning. She would already be sitting there with her cup of tea, watching the sunrise paint the pastures golden. "Good morning," Samuel said as he stepped outside with his coffee, just like he had every morning for the past week. "Good morning, Samuel," Ayanna replied with a gentle smile. But Samuel noticed something different in the way she said his name. It wasn't quite the pronunciation he was used to hearing. There was a musical quality to it, softer somehow, as if each syllable carried more meaning. They sat in comfortable silence, watching his cattle move slowly across the distant fields. Samuel had grown to love these quiet moments before the day's work began. Ayanna had a way of being present without needing to fill every silence with words. "Ayanna," Samuel said, after a while, "I've been wondering about something. Cherokee people have special names, don't they? Names that mean something specific." Ayanna nodded, setting down her teacup. "Yes, we do. Traditional names usually describe something about the person, or something the parents hope for the child. What does your name mean?" "Ayanna means eternal blossom, or forever flowering," she said. "My grandmother chose it because I was born in spring, when all the wildflowers were blooming." Samuel found this fitting. Even at 73, there was something youthful and vibrant about Ayanna, as if some inner light kept her spirit young, despite her body's frailty. "What about other people?" Samuel asked, his curiosity growing. "Do Cherokee people sometimes give names to people they meet? Adults, I mean. Ayana looked at him with interest. Sometimes, if we see something special in someone, we might think of them by a name that describes their true nature. It's not something we do lightly. Samuel felt his heart skip a beat. Have you ever done that? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding whether to share something personal. Finally, she turned to face him fully. Samuel, in my language, in my heart, I don't call you by your given name. What do you call me? Nvi Uji. It means healing heart. Samuel felt like the wind had been knocked out of him. Healing heart. Why would you call me that? Ayana's eyes grew soft with understanding. Because that's what you are. That's what you've always been, even when you didn't know it. The day you found me in that cabin, you could have just called for an ambulance and left me two strangers, but you didn't. You brought me into your home, into your life. You healed my body, yes, but more than that, you healed something in my spirit that I thought was broken forever. Samuel shook his head. Ayana, I'm not a healer. I'm just a rancher. I buy and sell cattle. I worry about grass and water and fences. I haven't healed anything in years. But you have, Ayana said gently. You healed my loneliness. After Thomas died, I thought I would just fade away in that cabin, forgotten by the world. But you saw me. You cared enough to save my life. And, in doing that, you saved something in yourself too. Samuel stood up abruptly and walked to the porch railing, gripping it tightly with both hands. Ayana's words had hit him like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the truth he had been avoiding for 5 years. I don't feel like someone with a healing heart, Samuel said quietly. When Margaret got sick, I couldn't heal her. I had all this money. I could afford the best doctors, the best treatments, but I couldn't save her. What kind of healing heart lets the person they love most die? Ayana rose slowly and came to stand beside him. Samuel, healing doesn't always mean preventing death. Sometimes healing means holding someone's hand so they don't face the darkness alone. Sometimes it means taking care of the people who are left behind. Sometimes it means opening your heart again when it would be easier to keep it closed. Samuel felt tears stinging his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. I miss her so much, Ayana. I miss having someone to care about, someone to worry about, someone to come home to. I know you do, Ayana said softly. But look what you've done. You found a dying woman in a cabin, and instead of walking away, you brought her home. You didn't have to do that, but your healing heart wouldn't let you leave me there. Samuel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his tears. I just did what anyone would do. No, Samuel. Most people would have called 911 and driven away. You did something different. You did what someone with a healing heart does. You took responsibility for another person's life. That evening, Samuel couldn't stop thinking about what Ayana had said. Healing heart, Nvi Uji. He found himself repeating the words under his breath as he did his evening chores. The name felt strange and familiar at the same time, like putting on a coat that had been hanging in the closet for years. After dinner, Samuel went to his study and turned on his computer. He had never been much for internet research, but he wanted to understand more about Cherokee naming traditions. What he found fascinated him. Cherokee names weren't just labels. They were descriptions of a person's essential nature, their role in the community, their spiritual purpose. The more he read, the more he understood what Ayana had given him. She hadn't just assigned him a random name. She had looked into his heart and seen something he had forgotten about himself, his capacity to heal, to nurture, to care for others. Samuel's wife Margaret had seen this quality too. She used to say that he had the gentlest hands of any rancher. She knew that he could calm a spooked horse or nurse a sick calf better than anyone. She said he had a gift for knowing what living things needed to feel safe and loved. But after Margaret died, Samuel had buried that part of himself. It was too painful to be gentle in a world that had taken away the person he loved most. He had focused on business, on building his wealth, on things that couldn't hurt him by leaving. Now, Ayana was showing him that his healing heart had never really gone away. It had just been waiting for someone who needed it. The next morning, Samuel found Ayana in her herb garden. Over the past 2 weeks, she had transformed a small patch of ground near the guest wing into a beautiful collection of medicinal plants. Samuel had never seen anything like it. Neat rows of plants he couldn't identify, all growing with a vitality that seemed impossible in Oklahoma's harsh climate. "How do you do it?" Samuel asked, kneeling down beside her. "How do you make everything grow so well?" Ayana smiled, her hands gently tending to a plant with purple flowers. "Plants respond to love, just like people do. You have to pay attention to what they need, give them the right amount of water and sunlight, protect them from things that would hurt them." "Sounds like raising children," Samuel said. "Or healing hearts," Ayana replied, looking at him meaningfully. Samuel understood. Taking care of Ayana, bringing her back to health, giving her a place to belong, it had awakened something in him that he thought was dead. For the first time in 5 years, he felt useful, needed, important to someone else's well-being. Samuel said, "Thank you for the name, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." "That's what family does, Samuel. We see the best in each other, especially when we can't see it ourselves." Samuel looked at this woman who had come into his life as a stranger and somehow become the person who understood him better than anyone had since Margaret. Maybe Ayana was right. Maybe he did have a healing heart. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what both of them needed. 2 months after Ayana had settled into the guest wing, Samuel barely recognized his own ranch. What had once been a purely business operation focused on profit, margins and cattle prices had become something entirely different. The change started small, but grew into something that transformed everything. It began with Ayana's herb garden, which had expanded from a small patch near the guest wing to a sprawling collection of medicinal and food plants that stretched behind the main house. Samuel watched in amazement as Ayana worked with plants he had never heard of, creating natural remedies that seemed to work better than anything from the pharmacy. "What's that one for?" Samuel asked one morning, pointing to a plant with silvery leaves. "Sage," Ayana replied, gently harvesting some of the leaves. "Good for healing cuts and soothing sore throats. Rosa's been using it for her grandson's cough." Rosa had indeed become one of Ayana's biggest supporters. The housekeeper, who had initially been worried about having another person in the house to care for, now sought Ayana's advice on everything from cooking to family problems. The two women had bonded over their shared knowledge of traditional healing and their love for Samuel, though they expressed it in different ways. But Ayana's influence went far beyond gardening. She had an uncanny ability to locate water sources on the ranch. During the ongoing drought, when several of Samuel's wells had run dry, Ayana walked the property with a Y-shaped willow branch and identified 3 spots where Samuel's well diggers struck abundant water. "How did you know?" Samuel asked, watching clear, cold water flow from the newest well. "The land tells you, if you know how to listen," Ayana said simply. "My grandmother taught me to read the signs, where certain plants grow, how the ground feels under your feet, the way animals move through an area." Samuel's ranch hands, initially skeptical of the elderly Cherokee woman, soon became believers. Miguel, the ranch foreman who had worked for Samuel for over a decade, started consulting Ayana about everything from where to move cattle during storms to which fields would produce the best grass. "Mr. Samuel," Miguel said one evening as they watched the sunset from the barn, "that woman knows things about this land that I've never seen before. Yesterday she told me to move the cattle from the south pasture because a storm was coming. I didn't see any clouds, but I did it anyway. That night, we got 3 inches of rain, and she was right. That pasture flooded." Samuel nodded. He had seen similar things happen dozens of times over the past 2 months. Ayanna seemed to have an intuitive connection to the natural world that Samuel had never encountered. She could predict weather patterns, locate sick animals before they showed obvious symptoms, and somehow make everything around her grow and thrive. The transformation wasn't just practical, it was emotional. For the first time in 5 years, Samuel looked forward to coming home each evening. There was always someone to talk to, always interesting conversation over dinner, always a sense that his house was truly alive. But not everyone was happy about the changes. The first sign of trouble came from Samuel's daughter, Patricia, who lived in Dallas with her husband and 2 teenage children. Patricia had always been practical like her father, focused on financial security and social appearances. She called Samuel one Tuesday evening in late summer. "Dad, I'm hearing some strange stories about you," Patricia said, without any small talk. "Mrs. Henderson from church says you're living with some Indian woman now. Is that true?" Samuel felt his jaw tighten. He should have expected this call. Her name is Ayanna, and yes, she's staying in the guest wing. She was very sick, and I helped her recover. "Dad, people are talking. They're saying you've lost your mind, that you're being taken advantage of by some gold digger." Gold digger? Samuel couldn't help but laugh. "Patricia, Ayanna doesn't want anything from me, except a place to live. She doesn't even let me buy her clothes. She makes her own soap and grows her own food. That's not the point, Dad. What will people think? You're a respected businessman in this community. You can't just take in random homeless people." Samuel felt anger rising in his chest. Ayanna isn't homeless, and she's not random. She's become family. There was a long silence on the phone. "Family? Dad, you've known this woman for 2 months. Real family is your children and grandchildren in Dallas, who you never see anymore because you're too busy playing house with some stranger." The conversation ended badly, with Patricia threatening to drive down and see what's really going on. Samuel knew his daughter meant well, but she had never understood that money and social status weren't the most important things in life. Margaret had been the bridge between Samuel's practical nature and his children's more materialistic values. Without her, the gap had grown wider each year. Samuel's son Robert called the next day with similar concerns, though his approach was more direct. "Dad, Patricia's worried about you, and frankly, so am I. We think you might be having some kind of midlife crisis. Taking in this woman, letting her live in your house, it's not like you." "Maybe that's the problem," Samuel replied. "Maybe I've been too focused on being the person everyone expected me to be, instead of being the person I actually am." "What's that supposed to mean?" Samuel looked out his kitchen window at Ayanna, who was teaching Rosa's young niece how to braid sweetgrass. The little girl, who was usually shy and quiet, was laughing and chattering away in both English and Spanish, while Ayanna listened patiently. "It means I'm happy, Robert. For the first time since your mother died, I'm genuinely happy. Dad, happiness isn't the point. You have responsibilities. You have a business empire to maintain, a reputation to protect. What happens to all of this when you're gone? What happens to our inheritance if you start giving your money away to every sob story that comes along?" Samuel felt a cold realization settle in his stomach. His children weren't worried about his happiness or his well-being. They were worried about their inheritance. The situation got worse when Patricia arrived unannounced the following weekend with her husband, David, and a lawyer friend named Mr. Thompson. Samuel was working in the barn when Miguel came running to find him. "Mr. Samuel, your daughter's here with some men in suits. They're asking a lot of questions about Mrs. Ayanna." Samuel found Patricia and her entourage on his front porch, with Ayanna sitting calmly in her usual chair, seemingly unbothered by the hostile atmosphere. "Dad, we need to talk," Patricia said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Privately." Samuel looked at Ayanna, who gave him a small nod and rose to go inside. but not before Patricia's lawyer friend spoke up. "Mrs. Crowfeather, I have some questions for you about your legal right to be on this property." Ayanna stopped and turned back, her dignity intact despite the obvious antagonism. "I have no legal right to be here, sir. I live here because Samuel has kindly allowed me to stay." "And what exactly do you provide in return for this generosity?" Mr. Thompson pressed. Samuel stepped forward, his anger flaring. "She doesn't have to provide anything. This is my house, and I decide who lives here." "Actually, Dad," Patricia said coldly, "we've done some research. This woman has been trespassing on your property for 15 years. She has no legal claim to be here, and if she's influencing your financial decisions, we might have grounds to claim elder abuse." Samuel stared at his daughter in shock. "Elder abuse? Patricia, what's wrong with you? Ayanna has never asked me for a single dollar." "But she's changed you, Dad. You're making decisions you never would have made before. You're spending money on wells and improvements based on the advice of someone with no education, no expertise, no stake in your success." Samuel looked around at his family, his daughter with her calculating eyes, his son-in-law nodding in agreement, the lawyer taking notes like he was building a case. Then he looked at Ayanna, who stood quietly by the door, her face calm but her eyes sad. "You know what, Patricia?" Samuel said quietly. "You're absolutely right. Ayanna has changed. Me? She's reminded me that there are more important things in life than money and what other people think. She's shown me how to be happy again. Dad, please be reasonable. No, you be reasonable. This is my property, my house, my life. I stays. If you can't accept that, then maybe you shouldn't come around here anymore." The confrontation ended with Patricia and her husband leaving in anger, but not before Mr. Thompson warned Samuel that they would be monitoring the situation for any signs of financial exploitation. That evening, Samuel found Ayanna sitting, alone on the porch, looking out at the pasture, where fireflies were beginning to flicker in the gathering dusk. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Samuel said, sitting down beside her. "Your children are afraid," Ayanna said gently. "They're afraid of losing you, afraid of change, afraid that there isn't enough love to go around. They're afraid of losing their inheritance," Samuel corrected bitterly. "Maybe, but I think underneath that, they're just afraid. Sometimes when people are scared, they do things that hurt the people they love." Samuel looked at this wise woman who had faced hostility with such grace, who could see the fear behind his children's cruelty, who never seemed to get angry even when people treated her badly. "Ayanna, are you happy here? Really happy? Because if this is going to cause problems with my family, ... Ayanna reached over and patted his hand. Samuel didn't sleep well for 3 weeks after Patricia's hostile visit. Every morning he woke up wondering if today would be the day his children would follow through on their threats. He imagined lawyers showing up at his door, court papers, demanding psychological evaluations. Or worse, some legal maneuver that would force Ayanna to leave. But Ayanna seemed untroubled by the conflict. She continued her daily routine of tending her garden, helping Rosa with household tasks, and sharing quiet conversations with Samuel on the porch each evening. Her calm presence helped Samuel think more clearly about what he really wanted to do. The answer came to him one morning while he was watching Ayanna teach Rosa's 8-year-old granddaughter Lucia how to identify edible plants. The little girl had been spending more time at the ranch since school started, and she followed Ayanna everywhere like a devoted pupil. "Grandma, Ayanna," Lucia said, using the name she had given Ayanna without anyone telling her to. "Why do you know so much about plants?" "Because my grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her," Ayanna explained patiently. "Knowledge like this needs to be passed down, or it gets lost forever." Samuel realized that's exactly what was happening here. Ayanna wasn't just living on his ranch, she was preserving something precious, something that couldn't be replaced once it was gone. Her knowledge of traditional healing, her understanding of the land, her ability to see the connections between all living things. These were gifts that few people possessed anymore. That afternoon, Samuel drove to town and made an appointment with his lawyer, Jerry Walsh. Jerry had been handling the Morrison family's legal affairs for 20 years, and Samuel trusted him to be honest about difficult situations. "Samuel, I have to ask," Jerry said after hearing the whole story. "Are you absolutely sure about this woman? Your children are worried, and frankly, some of their concerns aren't unreasonable. You barely know her, and you're talking about making major changes to your estate planning." Samuel leaned back in his chair. "Jerry, let me ask you something. In all the years you've known me, when have I ever made an impulsive decision about money?" "Never," Jerry admitted. "You're one of the most careful men I know when it comes to financial matters. Then trust me on this. Ayanna isn't after my money. She's given me something more valuable than money. She's given me back my life. Now I want to do something meaningful with that life." Samuel outlined his plan carefully. The bulk of his estate would still go to Patricia and Robert, just as it always had, but he wanted to set aside 500 acres of the northeastern section of his ranch, the area where Ayanna's cabin sat, to create a wildlife and cultural preserve. "I want to call it the Healing Heart Preserve," Samuel explained. "It would protect the natural habitat in that area and serve as a place where traditional Cherokee knowledge can be preserved and taught. Ayanna would be the permanent caretaker, with a modest salary and housing provided." Jerry took notes as Samuel spoke, nodding thoughtfully. "It's unusual, but it's not unreasonable. You're not giving away the working ranch or the main assets. This would actually be a good tax write-off if we set it up as a non-profit foundation. Can we do it in a way that my children can't challenge? If we structure it properly, yes. The key is making sure everything is documented correctly and that you can demonstrate you're of sound mind and acting without coercion." Samuel smiled. "I don't think anyone who knows me would believe I could be coerced into anything." 2 months later, Samuel called Patricia and Robert to inform them of his decision. He had all the legal paperwork completed and filed before he made the phone calls, knowing his children well enough to expect they would try to stop him if they had advanced warning. Patricia's reaction was predictable. "Dad, you've lost your mind. 500 acres. Do you know what that land is worth?" "About $2 million, Samuel replied calmly. "Which still leaves you and Robert with an estate worth over $15 million. I don't think you'll starve. That's not the point. You're giving our inheritance to some stranger. I'm creating something meaningful that will last long after I'm gone." Your mother would have understood. Robert was more practical in his objections. "Dad, what if this woman dies? What happens to the foundation then? The foundation will continue. I is training others to carry on the work. There's a young Cherokee woman named Morning Star who comes out every weekend to learn about traditional plant medicine. And there's Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the university who's documenting everything for future generations." Samuel had been surprised by how quickly word of Ayanna's knowledge had spread through academic and Native American communities. Researchers, students, and tribal elders had begun visiting the ranch regularly, eager to learn from someone who possessed such deep traditional knowledge. "Besides," Samuel continued, "Ayanna's healthier now than when I found her. Taking care of the land and having a purpose has given her new energy. She could live another 20 years. The real test came when Patricia decided to bring her own 8-year-old daughter, Katie, to the ranch for what she called a reality check. Patricia was convinced that once Katie saw how strange the situation was, it would help Samuel understand how his behavior looked to normal people. Katie had always been a serious, quiet child who preferred video games to outdoor activities. She arrived at the ranch on a Saturday morning wearing a pink dress and white shoes, looking completely out of place in the rural setting. But children, Samuel had learned, see the world differently than adults. Within an hour of arriving, Katie was following Ayanna around the herb garden, asking endless questions about the plants and animals they encountered. When Ayana showed her how to make a whistle from a willow branch, Katie's face lit up with genuine delight. "Grandma, Ayana," Katie said at lunch, unconsciously using the same term Lucia had chosen. "Can you teach me how to make that tea that smells like flowers?" Samuel watched Patricia's face as her daughter interacted with Ayana. He could see the conflict in his daughter's eyes, her protective instincts, warring with the obvious joy her child was experiencing. The breakthrough moment came when Katie fell and scraped her knee while exploring near the creek. She came running back to the house, crying, blood streaming down her leg. Patricia immediately went into protective mother mode, demanding antiseptic and bandages, but Ayana quietly knelt down beside Katie and gently cleaned the wound with water from her herb garden. She applied a paste made from plants Samuel couldn't identify, then wrapped the knee with soft cloth. "There," Ayana said softly. "The medicine will help it heal, and the pain will stop soon." Katie stopped crying almost immediately. Within minutes, she was running around again as if nothing had happened. By evening, the scrape had already started healing remarkably well. "How did you do that?" Patricia asked quietly as they watched Katie play in the garden. "Plants have been healing people for thousands of years," Ayana replied simply. "We just forgot how to listen to them." That evening, as Patricia tucked Katie into bed in the guest room, Samuel overheard his granddaughter talking to her mother. "Mommy, why were you so mean to Grandma Ayana before? She's really nice, and she knows everything about nature. Can we come visit her more often?" Patricia came downstairs looking troubled. She found Samuel and Ayana sitting on the porch, sharing their usual evening conversation. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said to Ayana. "I was so worried about protecting my father that I didn't take time to actually get to know you. I can see why Dad cares about you, and I can see how happy Katie is here." Ayana nodded gracefully. "You were protecting someone you love. There's nothing wrong with that." Patricia turned to Samuel. "Dad, I still think you're crazy for giving away all that land, but I can see that you're happy. Happier than you've been since Mom died. If this is what you want, then I'll support you." Samuel felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know." 6 months later, the Healing Heart Wildlife and Cultural Preserve was officially opened with a small ceremony attended by tribal elders, university researchers, and local community members. Samuel stood beside Ayana as they cut the ribbon at the entrance to the nature trail that wound through the preserve. "You know Nvi Uji Dale," Ayana said quietly as the crowd dispersed. "When I was dying in that cabin, I thought my life was over. I thought all the knowledge my grandmother gave me would die with me. And now?" Samuel asked. "Now I know it will live on. Morning Star is learning fast, and Dr. Martinez is creating a complete record of everything I know. The land will be protected, and future generations will be able to learn from it." Samuel looked out over the preserve, where a small group of children were following Morning Star along the nature trail, learning to identify medicinal plants. In the distance, he could see Katie and Lucia playing by the creek, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "You saved more than my life that day," Ayana continued. "You saved a part of our culture that was disappearing." Samuel shook his head. "We saved each other, Ayana. You gave me back my purpose, my family, my heart. This preserve isn't just about protecting Cherokee knowledge. It's about protecting the idea that we're all connected, that we have a responsibility to take care of each other and the land we share." As they walked back toward the ranch house,